You're listening to Kill Cliff's Hazard Ground podcast with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zinno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Before we get started, this week's guest, just an amazing individual holding one of the highest military positions in all of government. Very excited to talk to this individual. We happen to be his 100th podcast since departing the military. So I'm very excited. We'll get to that in a moment. First, just a few reminders. One, our partners over at Kill Cliff want you to get their Kill Cliff Killer Creamsicle, Cliffsicle, CBD clean energy drinks. Guys, Kill Cliff, a great partner of the show. Again, founded by a Navy SEAL. Proceeds going to the Navy SEAL Foundation, but I use Kill Cliff all the time. I use it for my pre-workout, my post-workout. Check them out, killcliff.com. Just great organization, great company, and certainly American-made, American-founded, and veteran-founded. So check them out online, killcliff.com. Download that Kill Cliff TV app because you can get all of our podcasts there as well. If you don't go to our YouTube channel, hazardground.com and YouTube, there where you can get all the video episodes. You can also get them on the Kill Cliff TV app as well. Follow us on all the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hazard Ground Podcast. Don't forget about our promotion with Amazon. If you're doing some holiday shopping, maybe even some post-holiday shopping, go to hazardground.com, click on the Amazon button at the bottom of the homepage or under the sponsors tab. It'll redirect you right to Amazon. You can do all of your shopping right there. We'll get a percentage of what you guys spend, and then we will donate a percentage of that back to some of the great charities and organizations you've heard featured here on the Hazard Ground. Also works on your smartphone, redirects you right to the app so your credit card information is saved. Very convenient, very easy, and you get to support veterans charities just by doing some Amazon shopping. And please continue to leave us Apple reviews, Apple ratings and reviews. Subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. We continue to grow, work our way up the top 100 Apple podcasts. We can't do it without your help. So please leave us a review. It doesn't have to be a long one. Just tell us why you love the show. And also guest suggestions, we take them there as well. All right, on to this week's guest because I'm super excited. He is the third, or he was, I should say, the third Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And this is a position where you are the principal advisor to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Secretary of Defense. He spent over 37 years in uniform, has 5 combat deployments, including other deployments all around the world, and spent the better part of his career visiting troops all over the globe. And after his military career, he opened his own consulting firm, PHE Hard Consulting, and now also serves as the strategic advisor and brand ambassador for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Hiring Our Heroes Foundation. And he is SEAC retired John Wayne Troxell, joining us on the Hazard Ground. It is a lengthy title, but well-deserved, and we certainly appreciate you joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mark. It's an honor to be here today.
Absolutely. Again, SEAC retired, SEAC being Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chairman. It's hard to encapsulate 37 years of your career, but, immediately, you don't ever go into the military hoping to be a SEAC. Maybe some people hope to make E8, maybe make Sergeant Major. Do you ever wonder, and look back at the chain of events that got you to that rank and go, man, I was just blessed, or did at some point did it become a plan or at least a desire to get to that level?
Mark, I think it was a little bit of both. First of all, I joined the military because, I didn't know what to do with my life. I grew up in Davenport, Iowa, and, had a loving home and everything, but I really had no purpose or direction until I saw older guys in my neighborhood coming back from recruit training, whether the Army or the Marine Corps. And I saw the confidence they had and the sinewy muscularity they had and how they walked with their head held high. And I said, you know what? I want some of that. And so I chose to join the Army. And initially I was just going to do 4 years. And, the worst thing that can happen to a young private is a month after I got to my first duty station, I met a young lady and fell madly in love with her. And she happens to still be my wife today, Sandra, of 38 years. And that kind of changed the trajectory for me because now I had responsibility. A year after we got married, we had our first child. And now I had a wife and a child I had to take care of. So I knew that I had to have structure in my life and I had to be able to take care of my family. And being a soldier just kind of came easy to me, It was just it was what I thought was grown up to be. And so I decided to stay in there. And then I said, I'm going to make the most out of this, because I realized that the more I performed at a high level, the more I would get promoted faster, and the more I would be able to take care financially of my family better. And then at a certain point, I started falling in love with the responsibility and being able to take care of others and everything. And then after that, I just set goal after goal, and never realizing that I would be the SEAC one day. But I said, I'm going to be the best soldier that I can be. And, when I hit 20 years, I thought, okay, I'm going to prepare for retirement now. But little did I realize I was just barely over halfway through my career, and I still had 17 more years to go. So I think it was a little of both that kept me going. And I was prepared to leave the military if they were done with me, but I kept getting opportunities. So I feel like I was really blessed to get to where I got to.
And again, the SEAC is the most senior enlisted member of the United States Armed Forces. But when you joined in the mid 80s, I mean, we're in a relative peacetime, sort of post-Vietnam sort of lull, if you will. Was combat ever in your like even mind at that point in time, or was it just sort of more of a job / career you got into for all the reasons you just mentioned?
Yeah, it was, as you mentioned, we were a peacetime military. Mm-hmm. I joined and never thinking I was going to go to combat. And, a year after I was in, Grenada happened, Operation Urgent Fury. But that was really, the Ranger Regiment, the 82nd Airborne Division, Special Operations Forces, both from the Army and the Navy and everything. And I thought, well, I'm a conventional guy. I'm a general purpose kind of guy. I don't think I'm going to be going to combat. But, when I left my first duty station, Fort Bliss, Texas, went to Germany to finish out my first enlistment. And all of a sudden I got enamored with being a paratrooper and being an airborne ranger and everything. And so my wife wanted me to stay in the military, even though I wanted to get out initially. And so I stayed in, and I said, hey, but I want to go to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And we went there. And the minute I got to Fort Bragg, things changed. Now, my first 4 years, I was in heavy mechanized units we were kind of, just doing the standoff with the Soviet Union, in East Germany and West Germany and everything. But I never thought we were going to go to war until I got to Fort Bragg in the 82nd. And that's all we talked about was going to war and serving on Division Ready Force 1 and everything. And the training was all geared to, for combat, that we may have to, in 18 hours or less, have to go and fight. And that came to fruition in 1989 with Operation Just Cause. And that's where I got my baptism by fire.
Now, that's the one in Panama, Just Cause. Just so non-military folks remember, Desert Storm doesn't kick off until 1990. And, the operation to get Manuel Noriega was, for lack of a better term, snatch and grab type deal. But it was the highest of the high, folks who were involved in that. When you leave that operation, does it sort of feed into your sense of what you thought combat was going to be like? Because there wasn't a whole lot of fighting in Grenada, what we've seen comparatively speaking to today.
Yeah, it was because, when I exited the airplane, first of all, when we were, on short final heading into Torrijos Airport, to conduct the combat jump, and the Rangers were jumping on Tocumen Airfield, which was just north. The airfields were adjacent to each other. The reports coming back was, the heavy drop aircraft were receiving anti-aircraft fire. And so, and then we were jumping at 500-foot altitude. So that was things, which is what our combat jumps normally are. And then when the doors came open and you could see tracer fire on the ground, that's when it became a reality. And then when we hit the ground, there was sporadic fighting throughout, the first 4 days. Some of it became heavy. I myself, on the night of the 21st of December, was involved. I was the lead vehicle, and we were in a 2-point ambush that hit us, and there were some folks that were wounded and everything. We ended up losing 4 paratroopers out of the division during that operation. But overall, there was only 18 killed in action with a couple hundred wounded. And again, any loss of life is bad. But compared to the numbers that we've had in Iraq and Afghanistan, you're right. It's not nearly the numbers. But it was everything that I thought it would be in terms of how we reacted to contact, how we conducted operations, and how we did business. And so I guess that 3-week combat tour kind of validated, I think, the credentials that we built through our combat simulated training. And I told myself when I came out of that, this is the blueprint to be ready for any kind of combat deployment. And as you just mentioned, Desert Storm, 7 months after I got back from Panama, I was on my way to Saudi Arabia with Operation Desert Shield and then Desert Storm. So that kind of got me into the mindset of being ready to deploy at any time.
Was there any part of you that, after Grenada and going right to Desert Storm, was there any part of you that sort of thought like, hey, this isn't what I signed up for, this isn't what I thought? Like, I got married, I had a child, and I wanted to just provide for my family, and this was more than what I bargained for?
Absolutely not. It kind of validated everything that I had been doing. This is kind of like, an NFL player that goes throughout their career and they're preparing themselves every Sunday to play. And what they're doing and they're working so hard is to get to the Super Bowl, and be in that big game and everything. And so, that I had the opportunity as part of a peacetime military in 1989 to conduct the combat jump in Panama was, one, a blessing, but two, it validated why I went to Fort Bragg in the 82nd Airborne Division to begin with, because I wanted to be part of a unit that had a high esprit de corps and had a great history and was at the cutting edge of all of our combat deployments.
I hate comparing battles because I think there's so much context, but we do it a lot with Iraq and Afghanistan because they were almost two different wars in the way they were fought and the tactics that were used. But when you compare Grenada to Desert Storm, is it fair to say that Desert Storm was easier?
Absolutely. I saw a lot more combat in Panama than I saw in Desert Storm. Now, remember, when we went to the desert for Desert Shield, Desert Storm, the Iraqis had 430,000 troops in Kuwait and southern Iraq. And back then, as we talked about, near peer kind of fighting and decisive action combat, to oust a dug in enemy, we had to have a 3-to-1 overmatch. So, the number of U.S. coalition forces that were there we were going to overwhelm the Iraqis with superior numbers, superior air power, and superior ground combat. So when we crossed the border into southern Iraq and Kuwait, we severely outmatched the Iraqis, and a lot of what I did was follow and support. Very, very little combat at all, or combat engagements. Obviously, we were prepared at all times because of, the Scud missile threats and the long range artillery that the Iraqis had and everything. But it was not the same as the close in direct firefighting that I saw in Panama City, which, as we know, is most urban combat is a lot tougher than fighting in an open plain like we were in southern Iraq. Yeah.
And Desert Storm goes by quickly, and all things considered, obviously, without much threat and loss of life. When it ends, what are you thinking about what's next for your career and sort of where you're going to go? Obviously, we have this 10-year lull before anything else happens to us, but at that point in time, you've sort of checked the block, right? You've done your tough combat, you've done your easy combat, and you've been around for, better part of 9, almost 10 years at this point. So what are you thinking about where your career is headed at that point in time?
Well, I was, because of the pride I had in serving in the 82nd Airborne Division in Just Cause and Desert Storm, I wanted to continue to serve in the division. I wanted to continue to be part of that tip of the spear that was on any given day, 18 hours or less, you could be in the next combat operation. But I knew that, for professional development reasons, I had been there for 5 straight years. I probably, needed to move on. And the Army did that for me. One, they selected me for Sergeant First Class early. And so then I was reassigned to Germany again. At that point in time, the Army not only was going through a major drawdown from Desert Storm, but also they were looking to get the combat experience and filter it out through the ranks as much as possible. So I found myself in 1992 back in Germany again, this time with the 3rd Infantry Division, but also as, the former Soviet Union fell, and all of a sudden there were a lot of those former Soviet countries that were having challenges, especially in places like Kosovo and Macedonia and places like that. So now here I was back in Germany as a platoon sergeant now, and I was more focused on, kind of deterring, being a deterrent for any kind of provocative action by the Russians or anybody else there, and supporting these other countries. So I just wanted to continue to excel, and I wanted to continue to become a better leader, and I wanted to be ready for whatever was next. And so everything I did then post-combat was related to being ready for combat. My physical fitness, how I trained my platoon, my platoon leader and I, in terms of physical toughness, in terms of marksmanship, in terms of battle drills, all the things, all those fundamentals, that blocking and tackling that make us good. And then that was about the point in my career that I realized I had to deliver the why to the troops. Why are we, thinking about, Kosovo, or why are we thinking about, Bosnia-Herzegovina or Macedonia? What's the why? So I knew at that point in time that I had to start understanding the bigger picture. And I started making a point to understand the big picture. And I think as a leader, and especially at the high tactical level, the more you understand operationally and strategically what's going on, and you can deliver that to the troops, the more the troops are going to be ready for whatever they have to do. Because, Mark, the deal. If a troop knows what they have to do in combat, especially, they may not like it, but if they know why they're doing it and everything, they'll accept it and they'll go out and get after it. But if they don't know the why, which sometimes happens because leaders aren't delivering it, and then all of a sudden they're like, what am I doing this for? And in the end, they end up fighting for each other because they don't know the bigger picture. We want them to fight for each other, but also we want them to understand what the tactical and operational goals are for the missions we're at. And that's about the time it kicked in for me. And I started realizing that I needed to be that guy to deliver the why to the troops that I was leading.
Amazing point, because honestly, it's one of those things where leaders so often tend to get insular and operate in a vacuum, especially when surrounded by other senior leaders. And they separate themselves from the ground level where everything happens. And truly in combat, I think you learn that better than any other lesson you have ever learned. And even those who go to combat and still stay at that senior level, who don't ever walk out into the fray, can't ever really truly understand the disconnect. It's in a meeting room, in a horse-shaped desk where there's nameplates and everything else. Everything seems simple and it goes to plan. Out on the ground, things are unforgiving, and they always will be. And the job of the leaders is to make people understand that you understand the gap is there, and you're asking them to do things that may not bridge that gap, but letting them understand why it's important, and the necessary role that they're playing in things is critical to mental survival, especially in combat.
Yeah, absolutely. I did not want to be that guy that spoke in the third person. Those bastards at the company headquarters are making us do this, or at battalion are making us do this. I wanted them to know that here is, what we're doing. And I wanted to speak in the first person. I wanted to own whatever we were expected to do. For instance, when I was a platoon sergeant in Germany in 1992 to 95, I had a pretty good platoon because I had some great NCOs. I had great platoon leaders and everything. And all of a sudden we found ourselves as kind of the go-to platoon for a lot of things. And sometimes that took away from the things that Joe really likes, which is, hot chow and rack time, And I wanted to make sure that they understood the reason we are the ones that are being put out on this point to kill the enemy reconnaissance and to give the commander the read of the battle is because who we are and what we are. And I said, and sometimes when you're really good at what you do, you're asked to do some things that others may not be asked to do. Now, remember, I was bringing lessons learned from combat to what I was doing in Germany. And we reverted in a hurry back to a peacetime military, Mark. But all the things that I had learned that made sense in combat, like, wearing camouflage, wearing body armor, and, conducting observation posts and listening posts kind of things, to make sure that, I had early warning from any kind of enemy attack. Some things that had kind of atrophied with the greater military because we had reverted in a hurry to this peacetime military, also because of this huge drawdown that we did. So when I would go through this, and I was really the only platoon in my battalion that was doing these kinds of combat related things, I had people looking at me like, what is wrong with this guy? Is this guy crazy or something? But I refused to waver on what I knew was right, even though, other folks were looking at this like pre-Just Cause and pre-Desert Storm, where we were a peacetime military. And we were a peacetime military again. But I told myself, Just Cause and Desert Storm validated to me that when you train for combat and you go through the rigorous efforts to simulate combat, you are going to be best prepared, even though you may have a force that has zero combat experience. If you train for the chaos of combat, you're going to be successful when the time comes. I'm convinced of that.
Just out of curiosity, you're in Germany when Black Hawk Down in Somalia kick off. It's a story we've told at least a dozen times here on the podcast. Having been to combat, were you sort of upset that you weren't able to be there? I'm sure you knew some of the guys or the units, at least, and what they were doing over there. I mean, what was your feeling as you watched that from the sidelines?
Well, so again, this goes back to delivering the why. Yeah, whenever something like Somalia goes down, and you see how, just one of the most terrific in terms of the level of intensity combat operations in our history, and you see just the heroics and the bravery of Task Force Ranger and everything, and what they did. Obviously, yeah, because you're not there, there's a little bit of envy, but then understanding, hey, look, I'm here. I'm part of this mechanized infantry division that is here, as a deterrent to any kind of Russian aggression, but also making sure that we can support any of this unrest in these former Soviet republics. So I understood that. The worst one for me was in 94 when Haiti came up, and the 82nd Airborne Division was on their way to conduct another combat jump into Haiti when the mission got canceled. And I was a little greedy, having, gotten that combat jump star from Panama. And I was like, oh man, I'm going to miss another combat jump, And if only this operation was a year later, because in 95, I returned to the 82nd Airborne Division, So, when you, the more you understand the oath that you swore in terms of support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and the more our country gets involved in any kind of conflicts, I think as someone that is a combat service member, you want to be there for your nation, and you want to be at that pointy end of the spear. And if you don't go to combat and others do go, there's just that normal professional envy that you wish you were there with them. Now, again, none of us, as you know, wants to go to combat and get people killed and everything. But, being someone that is a member of this warrior class, in the end, this is what we do. So, yeah, there was a little bit of, professional envy that I wasn't, I wasn't going to be in Somalia or I wasn't a Haiti and everything. But I realized, hey, I had my 2 combat tours already, and I'm sure there'll be chances ahead. I just need to press on with the mission in front of me that I have.
As I said earlier, it's hard to cover 37 years in a reasonable amount of time. So I do want to fast forward just a little bit. But in September of 2001, you would have been in the military for 19 years. You're at what rank at this point in time?
I was a brand new sergeant major. I had just graduated the Sergeant Major's Academy, and I was a brand new sergeant major. So
on September 10th, are you thinking of 2001? Are you thinking, man, I got a year left and I'm going to the promised land? I mean, did you start to see the end of your career, or you had said, I'm going to stay as long as they're going to let me stay?
Yeah, I had made the decision then. I had spoken over with Sandra, my wife, and I said, hey, look, and I had gotten some great advice from the sergeant major of the Army at that time, a guy named Jack Tilley. And Tilley said, hey, look, if you're going to stay in beyond 20, stay as long as you can, because you're going to continue to build a better portfolio for yourself post-military life, plus the training and education and experiences you'll get at this operational and then strategic level are going to be huge in helping you with post-military life. So to the point is, when I graduated from the academy, I started really studying what was going on in the world. And I had kind of looked back, and I was studying this terrorism thing, all the way back to, the Iran hostage crisis, the Beirut bombing, the hijacking of flight TWA 847 and Robert Dean Stephen, diver, getting murdered. The
flight Pan Am 103. Yep, over Lockerbie, Scotland.
Pan Am 103, Lockerbie, Scotland. The discotheque in Berlin, where Sergeant Ford was killed and everything. And then, post Desert Storm, Khobar Towers bombing, the first World Trade Center bombing in 93. I was kind of focused on this terrorism thing, even though we were still looking at Russia as a primary threat, at the time. And so when I knew I graduated from the academy, and I was working at Joint Task Force 6, which was it's now known as Joint Task Force North. And it was the counter-drug organization that supported, it was the liaison with the military training law enforcement on counter-drug operations. So I was operational in nature of what I was doing then, but it was all domestic and it was counter-drug. But there was kind of an overlap there, which caused me to study terrorism and everything. And so when 9/11 happened, that morning I was stationed at El Paso at Joint Task Force 6, and I'm out on a run in the desert. And all of a sudden I noticed all these planes landing at the airport. I mean, they were coming in low and fast. And I was like, what in the heck is going on? So I ran back to the headquarters. And when I got into our conference room, the big TV was on and Tower 1 was on fire and Tower 2 had just been hit. I knew right then and there that it was Al-Qaeda that was responsible, because I had been studying Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda and what they had done in the past. And then I knew that the world was going to change. And I knew that we were going to send a response. I didn't realize that it was going to be us sending troops to Afghanistan. And then, shortly after that we would go after Saddam Hussein in Iraq and his weapons of mass destruction. But I knew we are going to get operational in a hurry. And so at that point in time, I was on the CSN select list, and I wanted to go to a unit that I knew was going to end up deploying. And that was the 10th Mountain Division, who was already in Afghanistan when I got pinned as a command sergeant major, and I was on the road to move up there. So I thought I was going to find myself as a battalion sergeant major in Afghanistan, when in reality, my battalion and another battalion ended up going to Iraq, while the rest of the division went to Afghanistan. So I knew then at 9/11 that we are going to be an expeditionary military from here for the foreseeable future.
Do you get a sense at that point in time? Can you even tell that combat is going to be different than what you had experienced before?
Well, terrain wise, with Afghanistan and everything, absolutely. We knew that, especially up in, the Hindu Kush and in places like Nuristan and things like that, that it was going to be a lot of direct firefighting and everything. We didn't realize at the time the threat that was going to come from improvised explosive devices. This was something that, when the fall of Baghdad and everything, and we thought now, a huge mistake, in my opinion. We eliminated all of the security forces there, and all of a sudden, these roadside bombs started showing up, and all of a sudden, this insurgency kicked off. So we thought that this was going to be like Desert Storm with Iraq and Afghanistan. We thought in Afghanistan, we get Osama bin Laden, then we're done. Okay, we've captured the guy that was the mastermind of 9/11. Actually, we already had Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in under wraps and put him in Guantanamo Bay, and we were going after bin Laden and Zawahiri as deputy, and we thought, hey, we get bin Laden, this thing is over with, and we'll go back to what we were doing before. Little did we realize that when we got involved in both of those operations, that we were in for the long haul, because now not only did we have to eliminate an enemy threat, but now we had to do nation building. And, our military is not set up to do nation building. And so the elements of national power, our diplomacy, our economics, our information, and our military all had to come together to try and get after this thing. But we realized then, and I realized, this ain't going to be over tomorrow. And we are going to be doing multiple sets and reps of rotations into both Iraq and Afghanistan to get this right.
Yeah. I don't want to divert this to a philosophical conversation, because we could have a conversation about nation building for days upon days. But, and look, we can all Monday morning quarterback this thing a million ways to Sunday, right? Like that's not, I don't think that's a fruitful exercise. What I do think bears at least some discussion is the idea you talked earlier about the why, right? And nobody even stopped to think at any point in time about the why we're doing this. Like the goal, the idea on its merit that we were going to install democracy into another country that hadn't been a democracy for 2,000 previous years seems sort of ludicrous on its surface. And call it bravado, call it stupidity, call it a combination of both. We were grand enough to believe that we could do this because we're the greatest military in the world, and we are. But there's a lot of factors that we didn't take into play. And I want to fast forward, but I want you to stay in the mindset of where you were as a CSM, because obviously you had these level of conversations at the highest level of our government with people who are in the room making decisions with the highest levels of our government. At any point in time, are there people in the room even having the conversation of why and what do we really hope to achieve? And are these goals attainable? All the things that we go through in a basic military decision-making process, right? Writing a simple op order for squad tactics, we use that same premise. And you have to wonder, as laughable as it is that we do it so repeatedly and we get annoyed that we do it, is it ever even done at the highest levels?
Yeah. So, back to your point.
There was a lot there. I know. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So when I first got to Iraq in 2003, and I was part of the 1st Stryker Brigade going in, and we were replacing the 101st Airborne Division. So I was able to spend a fair amount of time with General Dave Petraeus, who was the 101st Airborne Division commander at the time. One of the things he used to say all the time in meeting with U.S. Diplomatic folks, the L. Paul Bremer administration that was in charge of the U.S. presence there and everything, he would say, how does this end? He would keep saying, how does this end? And people just kept giving him kind of the loser salute, that, okay, it's going to be, the Iraqi people are governing themselves. But I think, to your point, we spent too much time looking at the Iraqi problem set and the Afghan problem set through a U.S. lens. Yep. And as you just described, thinking that we were going to, put democracy in place as we know it. And and we realized our mistake in a hurry. But as I continued to move up through the ranks, one of the things I wanted to make sure is that we understood that this was a long haul and that we weren't going to have success overnight. And for instance, I went back to Iraq as Surge Brigade number 4 with 4th Stryker Brigade 2ID in 2007 and 8. And I think, anytime a brigade level organization or whatever goes into combat, they take on this idea that they're there to fix everything that the people before them couldn't fix. And they had the master plan of how to win the whole war, And I would say we were no less, And when we got over there, and I realized that the key thing to a 15-month deployment was going to be executing proper fighter management, meaning that we weren't running the men and women into the ground with, every night going after targets or every day doing attacks and everything. And so I tried to make sure that I was the guy that kept it in mind. So when we started planning an operation and we were moving a battalion or company icons, we're going to have them do an air assault into here. They're going to take down this high value target. Then they're going to go over here. And I would have to stop the staff officers and say, hey, hold up. Look underneath that icon. There's about 500 soldiers there that now we're talking about 4 straight weeks of hard combat and everything. And if we don't give them a break and we don't give them some downtime, we're going to erode their readiness and lethality in a hurry. So I learned that this is going to be a long haul and that we were going to do multiple sets and reps. And we needed to have interim kind of objectives that we could attain so that we could best prepare the next organization to come in and replace us. We weren't going to win it all. And I saw this in Afghanistan when I was the sergeant major of the ISAF Joint Command. When I would look at commanders and they would have a mission statement of defeat the Taliban. And as you know, the doctrinal term defeat means that enemy has no ability to do anything. They don't have any weapons. They don't have any kind of resources. And most importantly, they don't have any ideology to continue the fighting. And I said that we will never get the Taliban defeated. So we needed to use terms that the troops could understand and were more amicable, like disrupt, deny, deter, those kinds of things. But again, the U.S. bravado, we're here to fight and win. I got it. We're here to fight and win. And that's what we're trained to do. But we have to understand that you're not going to defeat that ideology in 12 months. You might defeat the Taliban fighters, but they're going to continue to go to Pakistan, get some more, bring them back after the winter's over, and you're going to keep fighting. So the point is understanding what were the situation we were in and what we could, realistically accomplish in our combat operations for that year. And then how do we make it better for the unit that's coming behind us? And how do we continue this momentum? That's what I kind of continued to make sure that the commanders I was advising were focused on. Not this, in this year that we're here, we are going to be the ones that are on the cover of Time magazine that we ended the Iraqi insurgency or we ended the insurgency in Afghanistan. I think we learned that over time we had to be realists.
Yeah. And that's why there's an argument. Instead of fighting one 20-year war, we fought 21-year wars, because every time we rotated a new unit in, they did their own twist, their own little nuance, their own little philosophy. And we never bothered to think of it from the other side. Like the Afghans and the Iraqis must be like, what the hell? Nobody from America does anything the same way. Every year we have to just keep changing stuff. But, and the other thing of this, which we never bothered to look at is, if ideologies were so easy to kill, America wouldn't be here 245 years later. They're Absolutely. Not easy to kill. So, again, much longer conversation for a much different time. That said, you deployed as a squadron, CSM, and then you deploy obviously as a brigade CSM. Obviously, you're going to sustain casualties and take loss. Is it different this time around in Iraq and then after in Afghanistan than it was in Grenada and or Desert Storm?
Yeah. So in Panama, the minute I hit the ground in Panama and we expanded the lodgement, we hit our assault objectives, we expanded the lodgement, and we started moving out. we met resistance there. And, one of the infantry lieutenants came up to my armored reconnaissance vehicle, and he comes up to me and he says, "Hey, just let you know, we've already lost an American." So within the first hour of fighting, we had lost Alejandro Manrique Lozano was killed in action in Panama. And so that kind of hit me. Wow, we lost a guy. And then when I was at one of our follow-on objectives on Tinajita Hill, one of our killed in action, Jerry Scott Davies, was being evac'd out and was on the helipad up there. And it's the first time I saw a U.S. corpse that had an American flag on it, glint tape, and had that 82nd Airborne Division patch. So that kind of hit me, and it stuck with me that this is brutal and unforgiving. And so as we prepared for our first deployment as a squadron CSM, I kept sending the message that the enemy gets a vote and we have to be ready for this. The enemy gets a vote, and, that's just the way it is. We are going to be best prepared to face the threats in front of us, but the enemy gets a vote. And, that first deployment during Iraqi Freedom, I lost 4 people during that deployment. And when I came back as a brigade CSM, I call it the worst day of my military life, the 19th of July, 2007. We had been in combat just short of 100 days. And, as the brigade tactical operation, or the TAC, myself and my commander, we had been in 6 firefights already. And on that day, we got hit by an explosive form penetrator that killed one of our PSD, Corporal Brandon Craig, and severely wounded our fire support officer, Major Danny Dudek, and then slightly wounded others. And so I don't think when you hear about or you see the first American killed in action soldier that you ever forget that. But every time it happens again, it just reinforces how brutal and unforgiving combat is. So I was prepared for it mentally and emotionally, but still you have to go through it, and again, during that operate, as Search Brigade number 4, we had 54 killed in action, which meant 54 flag draped coffins at ramp ceremonies, along with 500 severely wounded amputees and burn victims and all of this. So I think you prepare yourself mentally and emotionally for that. But in the end, every time it happens, you have to go through it, and it hurts every time.
I mean, how do you, look, you were kind of built for that moment, right? I mean, as a NCO, you had spent 20 years grooming yourself for the positions to lead. But at some point in time, I mean, at least for me, this is just human nature. Human nature takes over. Do you ever pause and begin to even say, even if I could articulate clearly the why isn't worth it at this point? When you're at ramp ceremony number 10, number 15, number 20, number 35, number 50, are you ever starting to think this is the loss and the cost of this are starting to be better than the outcome?
No.
Bigger than the outcome, I should say.
No, I never did, because during that same 15-month period, we had killed over 1,000 insurgents. We had killed or captured 250 high-value targets, which was the most by any brigade combat team during the entire Iraqi Freedom conflict. And I saw the progress we were making on the ground. And then here's the other thing is, if you know you can't turn it off, that you have to continue to go, then you have to continue to get back up on that horse and go out again. I remember on 19 July 2007, when Brandon Craig was killed, I went back to my room that night. I'm the brigade CSM, and I'm trying to understand that this young man, I knew his parents, I know his parents very well still today. And I knew that in less than 24 hours, they were going to get the worst news of their life. And here I was wrestling with how they were going to deal with this. And then all of a sudden I get a knock at my door, and it's my duty NCO. And he says, "Hey, look, we lost another soldier from 2nd Battalion, 1st Cavalry." And so I realized then that as much as I wanted to grieve, for this kid that was on patrol with me every day for 100 days, had been in my vehicle for training and everything, and I knew his family and everything, that I had to focus on what was going to happen tomorrow and what we needed to do to make sure we didn't have any more casualties. I think in this, this may be, just, John, but I think the minute, we start focusing more on reflecting the bad stuff that's happened, the more we're going to open ourselves up for more bad stuff to happen. I had to get myself in a mind frame to make sure that every day I promoted the physical, mental, and emotional toughness needed. So every day that we had a casualty, and especially after 19 July, the next day I wanted to make sure that the soldiers saw me in the gym, that I was getting my workout in and getting ready, that they saw me prepping my gear, and that I was checking my NCOs to make sure they were checking the troops' gear so that, we could go back out. And I even pulled our patrol together and I said, listen, I understand we lost one of our own today. We had one severely wounded. We've had some slightly wounded folks. I said, but understand this, we're not going to let the enemy win. And if all of a sudden we say it's too dangerous to go out, and all of a sudden we confine ourselves to here, we have conceded the terrain and the atmosphere to the enemy, and we lose. We're going to get back on our horse tomorrow. We're going to go back out, and we're going to take the fight to their ass, and we're going to keep showing them that they cannot break U.S. and coalition resolve.
Now, right? Like run through a wall. I'm with you 100%. Been there. I've had that same speech with my guys. And while, being in my mid 20s and full of piss and vinegar and, not without wife and kids and everything else, that all seemed grand and fine. What I realize now, and there is some truth to, you're 100% right. If you get in reflective mode while you're in the middle of it, you're hustling backwards. You're going in the wrong direction because you're not going to be able to stay focused. 100% agree. But that doesn't mean that the events don't compound for you and for others over the course of time. Why we are where we are with mental health and PTSD right now. And it's interesting because I had the conversation with my wife the other night, and you've met her, and we talk about some of the things that I'm going through. And I don't know why things are coming up now, 10, 15 years later, that I didn't deal with before. I don't have that answer, but I do know from doing this podcast and talking to enough people and doing enough reading on it, everything that we put in a compartment and stash away during our combat time, that doesn't mean it goes away. It's still in a compartment.
100%.
At some time it's going to come back out, and you have to be ready. Some people aren't ready to deal with it. So I ask you, while you were in the gym the next day, compartmentalizing, which is what is necessary to survive in combat, have you begun to even open some of those compartments again and dissect what is there and what you all had to go through?
I'm glad you went there, Mark, because this is really what I wanted to talk about. So I continued to, put stuff away, and I continued to focus. Even when we got through with that brutal 15-month deployment, I knew that now it's time to come back, decompress a little bit, and get ready for the next one. And then I just continued to focus on the mission. And I'm talking 11 years later. Now I'm the SEAC. I've been traveling all over the world. I come home and, I come and tell Sandra, I said, hey, hon, we're a year out from retirement. We need to start getting ready for the transition. And she goes, well, I think you need to go see somebody. I said, what do you mean? She goes, well, in a year from now, this Pentagon thing, this SEAC thing, this, being the senior guy in the DOD, it's all going to be gone. And then it's just going to be us. And I can't deal with you and this anger that you have all the time. Here I was. I thought I was just what a sergeant major was supposed to be, some guy hard on standards and discipline and everything. But I didn't realize until I went to therapy. So I make an appointment at behavioral health, and I go to my first appointment with the attitude of appeasing my wife. Okay. And I went in there, and the provider that, talked to me, her first name is Gina. As a matter of fact, her and I still talk today, even almost 3 years later. It felt like she was ripping my head open, and she was reading what was on my mind and everything. And what I didn't realize at the time, and she had kind of, traced it back and everything, that this kind of stuff started with Operation Just Cause. And for 30 years, I had been in denial and I had been compartmentalized. And all of a sudden, therapy was like a drug for me. But my initial thought after she diagnosed me with PTSD is, I have to walk out of this clinic here in the Pentagon, and I've got to go and tell fighting Joe Dunford, the chairman, General Joe Dunford, and General Mad Dog Mattis, Secretary of Defense, that I'm in therapy for PTSD. And that was the longest 100-meter walk I ever met in my life. And what I realized is neither one of them thought it was a big deal. I mean, and Mattis, he even said to me, "Good, I'm glad you're getting help. Now, when are you going back to Yemen to let me know what's going on with the troops?" My point in all of this, Mark, is I had been in denial, and you don't realize that you are compartmentalizing things until finally you accept it yourself. And so for almost 3 years now, I've been in therapy for my PTSD. I will tell you, a simple trip to the grocery store for somebody like me is a deliberate combat operation. I walk into the Safeway grocery store, there's one way in, one way out. So I know that, all of a sudden I'm channelized, all those memories of combat come in. You walk down the aisle, the shelves block your peripheral vision. People are behind you and you don't have eyes on them. Somebody has a cart sideways and now you have a blocking obstacle blocking your way. And here I am, racing to find a position in a point of dominance, a support by fire position where I have eyes on everybody so that my wife
can wanted some damn Oreos from aisle 3.
Yeah. So I'm so glad you brought that up, because so many of us are in denial and we think that it's a sign of weakness and stuff like that. But in the end, you hit it. You hit it best. It is human nature. You cannot go through the bad things that happen in combat and that kind of brutality and not have an effect on you. And I use the phrase now that my trips to the grocery store or me sitting in a restaurant with eyes on all doors and everything, these are the abnormal reactions or the normal reactions to the abnormal shit we've been through in combat. And that's okay.
I don't walk into a room without scanning the entire room, looking for points of egress and entry. And the first thing that goes into
my head drill 6
is if shit goes down, where am I going first? Right?
Yeah.
Like it's natural, and I remember when I got home from Iraq for my first deployment, not having my pistol on my hip was the worst feeling in the world. And I remember I was back in Maryland. There was you weren't allowed to get a gun back then. I live in Georgia now. Anybody can get a gun. But I never had one. But I left the house with multiple knives on me everywhere I went because I felt like I needed to have some level of protection. I'm walking down the street. Like, I get Baltimore can be a tough spot, but where I was not a tough spot. There was no, and I literally had to have a therapist tell me, Mark, there's no reason to act like that. Like, you're not in a dangerous situation going to get a burger at a bar. Like, you're not going to be attacked. Theoretically, you're not supposed to, and you have to kind of recondition yourself to think that way. But we are so trained because of what we've been through to always be at a heightened state of awareness. And I don't think that we realize that even that exercise that we go through, just mentally doing that when we walk through the room, still is slowly grading on us and degrading us into a mental position where we're not supposed to be.
Absolutely. When I got ready to retire, even when I was the SEAC, I lived on Fort Myer, the most secure base on the planet, because it had the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Army Chief of Staff, the vice chairman. It had all of these senior 4-stars on it. But even then, I locked my doors up at night. If my wife wasn't in the house with me, I'd sleep with the lights on. I'd have, non-lethal and lethal stuff around me. And then when I retired and moved to where I'm at now, I'm in a gated community. That was a must. I needed to be in a gated community because I needed that layer of defense, And then, the level of security I have on my house, the cameras, the non-lethal and the lethal stuff, all of this is born out of this being prepared. And I think, going to a restaurant to get a burger or going to the grocery store, it's not so much that we're afraid to go in there. We're afraid of what we don't know when we go in there, and that we always want to be best prepared, which causes us to be hyper vigilant in what we do every day. And to the lay person, it may seem like there's something wrong with us. And yeah, PTSD is a condition, but in the end, it is our normal reactions to the abnormal stuff that we've been through. And so I think the more and more we have to accept that this is part of who we are. Now, I will tell you, since I've been in therapy, I'm still vigilant, like you just described and everything I do, but I'm not as hyper vigilant, and it's allowed me to sleep better and everything being in therapy. So yeah, I'm with you, brother.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I'm just starting to go through all this now, and it's, having these conversations, and, it gets a little bit easier each time you go through it, but for some reason there are certain things that just hit you in a different spot that you're not prepared for. I think my biggest fear isn't that people wouldn't understand. I guess as much as that they don't believe me, if that makes sense. Like and I guess it's born out of understanding, but it's like, why is all this coming up now? Or like, I don't understand, like, why, you didn't deal with this after. I don't know. I don't know the answer to any of these things. I don't have the answers. I'm literally wading through it all as you're asking me the question. I can't tell you what the other side of the river looks like because I'm still in the water.
Yeah. No, I'm with you, brother. I've had conversation with veterans, a guy that still, he's been home from deployment for months, but feels more comfortable sleeping on a cot in his garage than in the bed next to his wife. And he's more comfortable eating MREs in the garage than having a home cooked dinner with his wife. I said, this is going to take time, but it's a process you have to go through. And, and then talking to his wife, hey, look, you have to understand that he's, and I hate using the word safe space because some folks nowadays use this safe space as, some room in a university or something, but a safe space for us is wearing combat gear, loaded down with weapons, and the enemy's barking at the door, which to the lay person doesn't make sense. Some of us, we feel more comfortable in Iraq and Afghanistan because we know we are in an environment where the threats are real, but we're armed for them, we're trained for them, and we're surrounded by like-minded people that are prepared to get after it if all of a sudden bad happens. Back here in the States, at a restaurant, a grocery store, we're not around a lot of like-minded people. It may just be us and our family. And, and all of a sudden we feel more vulnerable. And hence the, carrying knives with us or, having a pistol because, and I'm with you. I've reached down, I don't know how many times. And if my 9mm wasn't there, I'm like, oh man, now I'm vulnerable, So I just think this is why I focus so much in my retired life with making sure that veterans have purpose. And the more they have purpose, the more they can deal with the abnormal stuff they've had to go through from combat and everything. And that means also being in therapy. That means being enrolled in VA healthcare, or if they're a retiree, being enrolled in TRICARE with their family so that they have these resources that they can get to help them work through all of this baggage that needs to be unpacked from years of serving their country and fighting and killing the enemy.
Do you think back now, again, hindsight being 2020, you talked about, again, just getting the gym the next day, just charge forward. You hop from one assignment to the next assignment to the next assignment. And I did the same thing in combat. You get shot up one day. Okay, mission again tomorrow. Here we go. Hindsight being 2020, I think I would have benefited from taking a knee every now and then, letting somebody else handle the next mission, decompress for a little bit, get your head back above water. Do you look back on it and wish that maybe you had some of those moments where you could have taken a knee, or somebody who said to you, hey, John, take a knee?
100%. Absolutely. But again, if you think of the environment back then, Just Cause and Desert Storm, well, Just Cause especially, we were a peacetime military, and 95% of the military did not participate in that operation.
Right.
And if all of a sudden you come back from something like that, and you say, hey, look, I need to take a knee. Oh, well, this guy can't hack it. That would have been kind of the attitude then. Same with Desert Storm, and everything. So I think the attitude we have now, that it's okay to seek help and everything, we should have had that same attitude 30 years ago, and we should have focused on it back then. Yeah. And absolutely 100%. I wish I would have had the wherewithal to say, all right, I need to take a knee. Okay. And it's okay. I'm going to go see, a behavioral health specialist or somebody, or a combat stress person, I think if we would have focused on this more over the past 30 years, we would have a better understanding, and we'd have better resources, but more importantly, we would have a reduced stigma from seeking help for PTSD.
Not that I want to end this conversation, because I think it's super important, but I kind of want to just go back to, the assignments that you went through. Again, you were the ISAF Joint Command Sergeant Major. You end up going to U.S. Forces Korea there. So you have all these kind of high-level CSM positions. When do you first hear about being the SEAC? Is it something that somebody had mentioned that you were in the running for? Is it something that said they were looking, hey, and you raised your hand, I want to do it? Like, how does that whole transaction take place?
Yeah. So when you get to the nominative level, working for general officers, you really, your record is looked at by a panel of senior enlisted leaders. And so for me, I was continued to put on slates. And when I was at U.S. Forces Korea, which was a sub-unified combatant command, somebody came up to me about 2 years in. As a matter of fact, it was the current SEAC at the time, Marine Sergeant Major Brian Battaglia. He said, hey, you're eligible to compete for this job. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that, and I really didn't pay attention to it until I was about a year out. And Battaglia reached out to me and said, hey, I want you to put your name on this slate. And then I talked it over to my wife, and I said, okay, we'll do it. But then I realized I was among 10 of the most senior enlisted leaders in the Department of Defense that were competing for this job.
All branches, right?
All
Army,
branches.
Army, Navy, Marines. Gotcha. Okay.
Air Force. Yeah. All branches. And so I went, my records got looked at, and then I got a call, said, hey, you're one of the 3 finalists that General Dunford is going to interview. And I thought, okay, well, so then what I did then, and I think this is important for senior enlisted leaders, is, Dunford, when he took over as a chairman, he wrote a letter to the force, and he focused on 3 kinds of things, restoring joint readiness, continue to build lethality, and continue to take care of people. So I took what he was focused on, and I said, how do I develop areas that will complement what he's doing, but will get after the traditional things that sergeant majors get after: people, training, welfare, and things like this. So when I interviewed with him, I kind of laid that out for him. And, 2 weeks later, I got a call and he says to me, hey, Sergeant Major, how's everything going? I said, well, it's going good, sir. And he said, well, and this is what I love about General Joe Dunford, the consummate statesman, 40-year Marine. He says, well, if you and Sandra are up for it, we would love for you to come and be teammates with me and Ellen up here in Washington, D.C. That he didn't say, hey, I'm selecting you as the SEAC or anything. He made it out as a team effort with me and my wife, and him and his wife. And I thought, what the most eloquent way to tell somebody that you've been selected. So I realized then, okay, I've got to do 4 more years, because I tell people, when you go to Washington, D.C., and you get sworn in for a job, whether you're the SEAC, the chairman, or the president, you're doing 4 years. And but I knew then, now I'm going from the Korean Peninsula now to the world. And I knew I had to open up my aperture, and I had to focus on still what I was all about, delivering the why to the troops. And so that meant that this next 4 years, I had to study all the time. I had to continue to be knowledgeable on all service activities, for all the services. Even though I wore an Army uniform, I had to know as much about the Air Force as I did the Army and the others. And what that did is it caused me, again, a leader that is supposed to validate their credentials every day to make sure that they're doing the things they need to do to lead the men and women in the military. But also it caused me to grow and develop. And all of a sudden, I found myself in these strategic conversations with these senior 4-star generals, members of the Office of the Secretary of Defense, with the administration, and with the State Department and others. And all of a sudden, I started getting confident that I can deal with this kind of stuff as an enlisted guy. And so one of the things I focus on now is promoting enlisted folks that have left the military, are now competing in the corporate world, or those that are still serving, that are serving at the strategic level. Because I think when we look at enlisted folks, there's a place at the table for us alongside the officers in uniform and outside of uniform.
So you are the Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And you just say it out loud, and you feel a million miles away from the ground level. When you're trying to deliver the why, I mean, like, look, there's basic for, and I don't want to confuse the non-military folks listening, but you're at a strategic level. That's different than the operational level, which is different than the tactical level. And we talked about that gap before, and closing that gap, and the gap between strategic and operational and tactical. And the further up you go, the bigger that gap is. That why, those 3 letters, they don't only stretch so far in closing that gap. Do you feel like in this job, it's harder to deliver a why because you can't literally, reach out and touch the people on the ground the way you could as a brigade CSM, or, even a squadron CSM?
Yeah, it's 100%. It's a lot tougher. But I armed myself with a national defense strategy developed by the Secretary of Defense, the national military strategy, how we're going to use our military forces by the chairman. I armed myself with that. And I was on the road 270 days out of the year. Now, I couldn't get to every troop out there, but I went to places that, the garden spots that nobody wants to go to: Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, Libya, Yemen, Niger, Colombia, all the places that we had contentious stuff going on. That's where I spent a lot of my time. And in the Pacific, in places like South Korea, Indonesia, Singapore, places like that, I wanted to make sure that I hit as much as I could. And then, I used tools to help me deliver that why, like social media. I have had a huge presence on social media, and continued to deliver messages that were focused on the crises that were happening at any given time. And then every day I continued to learn and get better through my joint staff, the J5, the J7, and folks like that. And then I would continue to deliver this through mediums like this, even as the SEAC on a podcast or something like that. And then ultimately through our education systems, whether that was at the Sergeant Major's Academy or some of our joint courses or whatever it was, I tried to make sure that I was constantly delivering information. But more importantly, Mark, what I did everywhere I went for that 9 months out of the year, I listened more than I talked. I wanted to be able to give the pulse of the force to the chairman and the Secretary of Defense and the administration. Here's what the troops are saying at the tactical and operational level. So as much as I was educating them on the why, I was learning from them to give the pulse back to my bosses, so they knew whenever we started making decisions at the strategic level, this is the kind of impact it was going to have at the tactical level. And so it was kind of a two-way street. But again, it was a constant grind for 4 years to make sure I was getting after that.
In that experience, I'm curious of an example of something you maybe talk about when you talk about the pulse of the force. Like you have to know, because you were at that level at one point, that there are thoughts that go through your head. I have no idea why we do this. I have no idea why the Army and all of its infinite wisdom, or the Department of Defense and all of its infinite wisdom does X, Y, and Z. Was there something repetitively that you heard, or was there a preconceived notion you had thinking that, when I get to this job, this is one of the things I'd like to fix? Can you kind of put some, examples out there of repetitive things that maybe you didn't think that the force was focused on and you learned about, or something you thought was always a problem that you were able to put your hands on?
Well, so some of the things, anywhere I went to visit some of our elite special operations forces, I'll tell you, I landed in Misrata, Libya, and I get off the aircraft, and one of our elite Navy officers, special operations officers, a lieutenant commander, the first thing he says to me, "Hey, what's the foreign policy that guides us for why we're here? I know the military action. I'm here to kill ISIS." But he was kind of saying what Petraeus asked 20 years earlier on, how does this end? Me and my guys are here fighting our butts off, but how does this end? And I knew then I had to understand the strategic level, the direction, why we had troops where they're at. One of the key things I remember, I went to southern Somalia. I had went to Kenya, and I was with, again, another, our elite Navy Special Operations Forces, the most elite. And I was in Nairobi, Kenya, and then I made my way over into southern Somalia. And a couple of weeks before I had been there was an attack on a Kenyan Ranger camp by Al-Shabaab. And the U.S. Special Operations Forces that were there had, they didn't have, the authorities to be able to attack large-scale formations of Al-Shabaab fighters unless they were conducting some kind of hostile act. So there could have been 300 Al-Shabaab fighters with weapons sitting in a patrol base, but if they were doing anything hostile, we couldn't attack them. Didn't have the authorities to do that. And by the time we did get the authorities to do that and conduct an attack, they were already gone, because it would take days to get those presidential authorities. So anyways, I go over there and I visit with this ODA that was a part of this operation where they had to abandon the camp and the Rangers really got their asses handed to them. And so as I started talking to our special operations on the ground, I realized we didn't have the proper joint fires that they needed. We didn't have the proper intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance stuff that they needed. The golden hour of medevac was way out of whack, and recovery assets were 3.5 hours away in the country of Djibouti. So I sent a message to Secretary Mattis and General Dunford and basically said, here's what we either give them the assets they need or we send them a ton of body bags because we're going to lose some Americans down here. I said, if we can't give them the stuff they need, then let's give them the authorities they need to conduct, attacks on these Al-Shabaab mass formations. And so then President Trump changed the authorities in Africa. And now commanders on the ground had the ability through their combatant commander, not through the president, to be able to attack what they perceived as hostile targets, changed the dynamic completely. So that was just one incident where me going on the ground and having a direct line back to the senior leaders had an impact. But some of the things that I tried to get after every day was every time I would go to Congress or I would go to cabinet meetings or whatever, I realized that, there was a disconnect between Washington, D.C. and what the troops were doing on the ground. And I wanted to make sure that the troops knew that we didn't forget about them. And this is kind of when, I realized that Washington, D.C., some places they were looking for ways to deter foreign terrorist fighters by giving them a job, instead of allowing us more authorities to attack and kill them in places like Syria and places like that. And I realized we weren't looking at this right. And that's when I said, I need to send a message to the troops so they understand that we understand the severity of the conditions they're fighting under and that we have their back. And that's kind of when I called out ISIS and I told them they had two options. They could surrender or die. And, never did I think that this message about beating the enemy to death with an entrenching tool was going to go global or viral or anything. All it was to inspire the troops that we understood what they were going through and we had their back. And little did I know it was going to go viral. And next thing I know, I've got, Nancy Pelosi criticizing me. I've got CNN, ABC, and all these other networks criticizing me. And pretty soon, all of a sudden, I'm being scrutinized by people in the Pentagon and everything. And it was not a good time for me at that point in time. My point in all of that is these were the techniques I was using to deliver the why to the troops. And as you said, Mark, it's pretty hard to deliver the why when you are layers and layers away from the troops on the ground. The methods I used and the techniques I used were effective in delivering that why. But in the end, there was some backlash from me doing it that way. But if I had to do it all over again, I would do it the same way because it was effective. Not only did it give the pulse to the chairman and the SecDef, but the troops more and more knew what the heck they were supposed to be doing out there, and they understood why they were doing it.
I'll ask this question bluntly just because it's who I am. You can choose to answer it as diplomatically as you like. How screwed are we because of our government leaders? I mean, I say that tongue in cheek, but I just mean the bureaucracy in our government. And when you see it at the level that you did, and the way we operate, you'd like to think everybody is there with America's best interests at heart and their constituents' best interests at heart. But politics is messy. It's a contact sport. You're dealing with these people all day long who have motives that aren't necessarily serving the greater good. So when you see that, does it sort of, I don't want to say tarnish your view, but I guess twofold, is it as bad as it looks from the outside looking in? And how do you view, what you saw from a soldier's perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will tell you, I think, some leaders in government try to dumb down the potential threats to our nation, and I'm speaking specifically about China right now and the level of threat that China is to our freedom, our homeland, and our way of life. And with their One Belt, One Road initiative around the world, where they have influence in Africa and South America, in the Middle East and other areas, and their predatory economical practices and the things that they're doing, and then the adventurism by Russia, where they've got troops massed on the Ukrainian border. They've already annexed Crimea. They've caused unrest in the eastern part of the country where there's a war going on there. And then them being in Africa, them being in the Middle East, and then, the everyday potential response to a crisis that we would have to execute against an Iran or a North Korea. And then that threat of terrorism that hasn't gone away. The American people don't necessarily need to have a rosy picture painted to them that because we're not in Afghanistan anymore, that Al-Qaeda and ISIS and the Taliban aren't threats anymore. They need to know that they are a very viable threat and that we as a nation have to continue to work together and come, and make strides to make sure that we're not vulnerable. And the same with, with China and Russia, and the same with Iran and North Korea. So I think when politics get involved with national security and, all of a sudden that can be a very dangerous combination, and it could cause us to be vulnerable. We could lose competitive advantages, and and then our grandchildren and great grandchildren could suffer from it. I think in the end, we as the United States of America, along with our partners and allies, can't be afraid to tell somebody like China and Russia, that we're not going to put up with what you're doing, and send messages to the Iranians and the North Koreans that if you do something stupid, we're going to bloody your nose. And certainly we have to continue to advance on making sure that there's no spectacular terrorist attacks in Western Europe again, and certainly not in the United States of America or in Canada or any other place like that. We can't sit around and think that talking nice to these kind of insidious kind of threats is going to get them to change who they are and what they do. It's going to be take action. As you know, our president is talking today to Vladimir Putin. And I will tell you, Putin is a very savvy individual, a career intelligence officer. He knows how to manipulate people. My hope is that our president will put a knife edge on him and will kind of tell him this is exactly what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. Because if we continue to mollycoddle and just play games, somebody like Putin and somebody like Xi Jinping will manipulate that for China and Russia's purposes and will constantly look to build advantages against us. So, Yeah, I there were times when in my job that up there that I was concerned with some of the things. And again, the first year I was up there, it was about this ISIS jobs program for foreign terrorist fighters that come from affluent countries and families in Belgium, France, and places like that. When I realized we weren't looking at the problem right. So in the end, you hope that these leaders in government see that, what the American people expect and what we need, and they make the best decisions to it. But, sometimes you have to question what their motives are.
Sure. You've been out of office now for just shy of 2 years, out of the office of the SEAC. You've been in the military or around the military for nearly 40. How are we better? How are we worse? How are we different? You don't have to necessarily characterize it as better or worse. That's all contextual, right? I mean, we have better technology now. We're better equipped. I mean, than we were 40 years ago. So clearly we're a better fighting force. But just from that standpoint, what you've seen over the course of your career, particularly when you look at it from the SEAC level, because it's such a macro view, because that's all you've studied on, what we do well versus what we don't do well. You can't take a 10-foot view. You got to take a 10,000-foot view.
Yeah. So I think that our greatest competitive advantage right now is how we've developed the structure in our leadership and management ranks. And what I'm getting after is how we built this non-commissioned officer and petty officer corps in our military from where we were a conscription force in Vietnam. Shortly after that, we professionalized, became an all-volunteer force, and then we started building non-commissioned officer and petty officer education systems to where we're at now in over 20 years in Afghanistan and 18 years in Iraq, where we have continued to build on the ability of non-commissioned officers to lead, to execute disciplined initiative within a commander's intent, apply agile and adaptive practices and thinking, and solve problems, neutralize threats, and accomplish missions without being micromanaged or being told the method of how to do it. As long as it is in keeping with the law of warfare, our ability to allow this mid-level kind of leadership to blossom and grow and to make decisions, that's very powerful. And when you look, if we've got to fight in the mountains of Korea on the Kaesong Heights, or if we got to fight in Eastern Europe, or wherever it could be with China, or in the plains of Iran, this may start as a high-end decisive action combat kind of activity, but it will, all of a sudden degrade in a hurry to low-level kind of conflict based on leader initiative and things like that. And that's where we will have the advantage because of what we do every day to train our NCOs and our petty officers. We have the absolute best NCO corps on the planet, and it's a model for every other military, to include the Chinese now, on how they want to get to. And as long as we have that competitive advantage, I'm confident that we will be successful at the tactical and operational level in future conflict. Again, strategically, as we've talked about, if the foreign policy doesn't match the military action, which it kind of didn't in Iraq and Afghanistan, we're going to have struggles. And if we don't understand the people, the threat, and our partner forces like we didn't in Afghanistan, we could be there for a while. But in the end, at the operational and tactical level, as long as we have those empowered, trusted, non-commissioned officers leading the way, we're going to be successful. That's one thing I'm extremely proud of. Now, one thing that concerns me now is we're putting a lot of time and effort in this people first kind of thing, which I think is important. In order to build, as you know, Mark, cohesive, lethal, ready organizations, then everybody in that organization has to be treated with dignity and respect. They have to feel that they're making an impact. They have to feel that they have the ability to grow, develop, and reach their untapped potential. So I think we got to get better at building cohesion and getting after what we call these corrosives of sexual assault, sexual harassment, suicide, racism, extremism, and everything. But what we can't do is allow that to consume what we're doing every day. And we have to remember why we're here, and that's to fight and win our nation's wars. And we can't forget that. and that we've got to continue to focus on being more lethal, more fit, more focused, more ready. And that, as I mentioned the last time you and I were together at that event in Atlanta, I said, if we made an assumption that we're in an era of persistent peace, that would be a hugely dangerous assumption that could cause us to get people killed, because, complacency will set in, and those pacing challenges or threats will have competitive advantages. So we can't forget who we are and what we are as we continue to build on cohesion and take more care of our people. We can't let that override what our primary mission is, and that's to fight and win in a brutal and unforgiving profession known as being a member of the warrior class of the United States military.
I 100% agree with you. The fact that our NCO Corps is strong, we have better soldiers, better airmen, better Marines than we've ever had before. And part of me says, thank God, because, and remember, this is an officer speaking. I do think we have a leadership issue, particularly at the senior levels. And we're in this weird stage right now where the most senior folks come from a different lifestyle, different mentality, a different sort of upbringing in the military than some of the youngers do. And that disconnect, I think, is a major problem within the military and within our organization. And again, without sounding boastful or arrogant, I think of myself as a sort of transformational leader in the sense that I understand the audience I'm talking to is not the audience I grew up with. The people I'm choosing to lead are not the people that I served with. And so I have to do things differently in order to reach that audience and let them understand and make them understand where we need to go. And it is incumbent on us to groom the next generation of leaders for the organization, not how we were groomed, but how they need to be groomed to lead the organization that is in a constant state of flux, more than I think we ever have. Look, you've been around for 40 years. Have you seen anywhere near as much change as you've seen in the last 5 to 7 in our organization? I would argue you probably haven't. I'll defer to you on it, but the leadership component of the military and the backbone of it, again, I think NCOs make great soldiers and great airmen, great Marines, great sailors, whatever. But the leaders at the top, to me, at this point, we've got a gap that we've got to close and got to fix.
Yeah, I agree with you. I say this all the time, and General Dunford used to say this all the time. The character of conflict is going to be ever evolving, and that's what we're seeing with cyber and space. Re-energizing the nuclear command and control kind of stuff and everything. Those kind of emerging warfighting domains, they're, now with hypersonic weapons and all this stuff, and, the electromagnetic spectrum and all this stuff. All of this is evolving the character of conflict. But the true nature of conflict, I think, is never going to evolve. And that means that it's the will of one people or organization or institution or nation against the will of others, and who's going to prevail in that kind of fight. And I think the foundations that we focus on, the physical fitness, the mental and emotional and technical and tactical readiness, the education, the training, the experiences that we give men and women, I think those have to continue to transcend any change in the character of conflict. So I agree with you that, we've got to continue to, leverage technology, leverage industry. We have to continue to look at things on the emerging battlefields that are going to be different. But in the end, it's going to take these capable men and women that it's always taken to be able to do that. So the more we grow and change, the more we have to keep the foundations the same, in my opinion. Because in the end, as we've talked over here about what conflict is all about, in order to endure the kind of brutality and suffering and all that comes with combat, the physical, mental, and emotional fitness and readiness for the force is what's going to get us through that.
You had 4 years as the SEAC. Did you want to serve longer, or they tell you that you're done after 4 and it's a one-shot deal? How does that work?
Well, I think I was done. I mean, it's a four-year deal, but, General Milley came in. He was the new chairman. I was hoping he didn't ask me because he had only been on the job about 4 or 5 months. and I had been in the SEAC position for 43 months. I was hoping he didn't ask me to stay on because it was time for me to retire. And after 4 years, I said, somebody else needs to come in and take this position. And the current guy, the Air Force guy, CZ Colon Lopez, he's moving out with it and doing great things. But again, I think at that point in time, with selfless service being your attitude, if somebody would have asked me to stay on, I would have had to have huge thoughts with that and talked it over with my wife. But in the end, I probably would have declined because my 4 years was up. I was going to be at 1 month shy of 38 years of active duty service, and it was time for me to move on and do other things and let those coming behind me come in and do the job.
Those other things that you were heading towards, PME Hard Consulting, the company consulting firm that you founded and opened, what's that about, and what was the kind of genesis of it?
So when I got ready to retire, I didn't want to grind. I wanted to focus on the things that I felt were my strengths. Now I say that, I'm on the road all the time, but I wanted to focus on developing leaders and developing people in the human performance domain. So I wanted to focus on education, physical, mental, and emotional health, and continuing to build people to be greater leaders. So I started my own consulting company, and now I consult or I'm an advisor for 8 different businesses. Plus, I'm constantly being asked to go and speak at military organizations, but also to civilian businesses. As a matter of fact, tomorrow I get on a plane and I head to Tucson, Arizona to do some organizational leadership with a business down there. So PME Hard Consulting is all about that. And that's what I focus on now. Along with that, I also started my eTool Nation kind of apparel and gear line, which is geared to get after the, supporting the warriors and the warrior ethos. And it was all based off of, what I said about ISIS and everything. And now eTool Nation, everything I get from the apparel line, kind of like what Killcliff does, everything I bring in, I give out to foundations. So for instance, in 2 weeks, I'm going to Iowa, and a great foundation called Downrange Excursions that takes those service members suffering from PTSD, gets them out doing things in the wilderness, hunting trips and stuff like that. I'm going to make a huge donation to that organization. But also because I'm in the corporate world now, I wanted to support organizations that help those in the corporate world. So I'm also going to make a huge donation to the Lighthouse for the Blind. So all the things that I bring in with eTool Nation, I want to put back into foundations that take care of those that need help being taken care of. So that's kind of what I'm doing with that, and PME Hard pays the bills so that eTool Nation can be supporting the nonprofits and everything.
How's retirement treating you? You're finally learning to gear it down, take a knee a little bit?
Oh, yeah. So I work out of my house, my office. I make my own schedule. I do everything. My wife and my youngest son are a part of my business and everything. But I'm enjoying life, Mark. I was asked the other day, I was speaking at an event up on Joint Base Lewis McCourt, the 7th Infantry Division, and one of the senior NCOs, do you miss it? Asked me if I missed it at all. And I said, absolutely not. I missed the camaraderie of being around like-minded individuals, but I do not miss the bureaucracy. I don't miss the grind. And now from my position where I'm at now as a retiree, I'm still giving back to the institution that gave me so much. I'm just doing it in a different role now. And also, I can wake up in the morning if I decide that I don't want to do PT today, which doesn't happen very often, or I don't want to do any kind of work. I can say I'm not doing anything today. I'm spending it with the wife or the grandkids. That's so awesome. I'm enjoying life, and I'm taking it every day and just enjoying it.
Just out of curiosity, I'll ask, was working in the Trump administration as crazy as it looked from the outside looking in?
It on the surface, it looked chaotic.
Yeah.
And there were times it could be chaotic, especially, in my quarters at Fort Myer, I had a secure compartmented facility in there where I had, my top secret email, I had secure email, non-secure email, but every day I would get up and check, my top secret, and non-secure emails, and I would check Twitter to make sure to see if there were any executive orders put out over Twitter. Now, having said that, I will have to tell you though that President Trump made NATO a stronger organization because he forced those NATO nations to up their GDP spending to defense what the United States was doing, which made it stronger, made it more of a deterrent to Russia. He pulled us out of some trade agreements with China that hurt the Chinese economy a little bit, which hurts their military machine. He brought those businesses back home that strengthened our economy at home. And, I think at one point in his administration, the unemployment rate was the lowest it had been in 50 years. And unemployment for African Americans and other minorities was the lowest it had ever been. So there was a lot of good things that were happening that you had to get below that layer of chaos and Twitter speak and bluntness that he had and everything. And I will tell you, my last trip as the SEAC was to Afghanistan. And it was President Trump was there. So General Milley and I went there, and President Trump was there. And I got to saw how President Trump was. He was only supposed to be on the ground for 4 hours. He ended up spending like 9 hours on the ground. Every soldier that wanted a picture, he took a picture with them. He went and spent time with the 2nd Ranger Battalion there, handed out combat awards and Purple Hearts and everything. And a couple of times the Secret Service were telling him, hey, Mr. President, we got to go. And he finally told him, hey, look, I'll tell you where we're going to go. We're going to stay here. And I'll even tell you, when he got ready to come and talk to the troops, he grabbed President Ghani, the president of Afghanistan, brought him into this hangar on Bagram Airfield that had almost 1,000 troops in it. And he gets up there to talk to the troops, and he gives Ghani a chance to talk to the troops too. Just a very class act. So yes, there was chaos. Yes, every day you had to deal with something on Twitter or something like that. But you cannot take away from the good things that he did as not only the president, but as the commander in chief. And in John Wayne Troxell's opinion, we were much stronger as a nation, and especially in military terms, when he was the president of the United States.
Sure. Amen. I mean, it's I don't know, we don't dive much into politics in the show, and that's never even part of the conversation. Yeah. Everyone's allowed to have their own opinion on it, but it's always good to see when leaders take the time to spend, especially, the commander in chief kind of leader, to spend time with the soldiers. It doesn't happen often enough. And we talk about that disconnect and that gap, and it's incumbent on the people at the highest level to sort of close that, because the ones at the bottom can't go up. The ones at the top have to come down. So I think it's great that you were there to witness that. And certainly, your time as a senior NCO lends to that, always looking out for Joe, so to speak. Other than all those other organizations you're working with, anything else that we need to talk about from your standpoint?
No, I just want the men and women in uniform that are going to be watching this and they're still serving. Be proud of who you are and what you do. And we may, in John's opinion, had an abrupt exit out of Afghanistan after 20 years, but that does not take away from all of the gains we made in Afghanistan for 20 years and in Iraq for 18 years and other places around the world. Wherever the United States military has been, we've made an impact either on the threats or the host nation or the people that were being oppressed. We've always made an impact. So be proud of who you are and what you do, and keep striving for excellence and keep after the mission. And for those that have served, those veterans out there, God bless you for your service. Be proud of your service. Be proud of who you are and what you are. And it costs you nothing to seek help if you're out there struggling. And last but not least, to the families that support our military and our veterans, we couldn't do it without you. God bless you all, and thank you all as well. And Mark, thanks again for having me today. It's been an honor to be here on the Hazard Ground podcast, brother.
Oh, it has been an honor to be your 100th podcast.
Since 100 in 2 years.
100, that's
100
right. 100.
In
so
2 years.
We are as special to you as you are as us. But I don't need to say anything further. Certainly appreciate your time and everything that you've shared with us. And, as we always say, we end the podcast the same way. SEAC retired John Wayne Troxell. Thanks so much for being part of the Hazard Ground.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Kill Cliff's Hazard Ground podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at producer@hazardground.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.